Here we are on a Monday with Weather Academy meteorologist Craig Flint. Couple of house cleaning items for you. So this is the last week we're going to be on 3 days a week. We have a couple more topics to discuss. We hope that you've been able to kind of glean something from these. We've explored a lot. And we still have a few more to get through, and we're going to discuss today's topic, which happens in the summer really all year round. And it's another one of those things that, people don't really think about too much, and that is air quality, which is something that we monitor not only in the summer, but year round. A lot of people may think it's most prevalent in the summertime, and it is, but it's also pretty prevalent in the wintertime as well, and that has a lot to do with air temperature and inversions and stuff like that, which we'll kind of dive into. So today's topic is air quality, and we're going to kind of start this out with, I guess, kind of a somber note. It's a stat, and it might be a little bit surprising to you, but while we were looking up this data and doing the research, did you know a staggering 4.9 million people die annually every year from bad air quality? It's a pretty high number. It was actually pretty surprising to see. So air quality might not be something you think about, but it can have a big impact. I mean, 4.9 million, that's a big number. And of course, this data comes from the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation and also the Global Burden of Disease Network. So I know I don't want to start on a downer, but I thought that was a pretty eye-popping stat. So air quality definitely can be an issue, and we're going to kind of delve into air quality and how we monitor it, and we're going to look at some data over the past several years. And there's actually some good news here. So even though we started out with this, there's actually some good news. All right, so you might have remembered when we were talking about the layers of the atmosphere, we talked a little bit about ozone. Well, there are two types of ozone. There's good ozone and bad ozone. So the good ozone is the ozone that absorbs most of the radiation from the sun. We need that because if we didn't have that ozone, we would be in trouble. So all of that harmful UV radiation that comes from the sun, the good ozone, which is in the stratosphere, if you remember back to layers of the atmosphere, that kind of keeps us protected from all the bad stuff in terms of ozone or in terms of radiation from the sun. So if that weren't there, we wouldn't be here. So you have good ozone, absorbs most of the radiation from the sun, found in the stratosphere, and then of course bad ozone, and this is also known as ground level ozone. This is formed from pollutants that react chemically with the sun, and that's found in the troposphere. Well, the troposphere is where we live, lowest layer of the atmosphere. And that bad ozone, ground level ozone, gets trapped here at the surface. And that's why you get things like in the bigger cities, smog. If you ever kind of looked at LA or New York City in the summer and you kind of see that haze, that's all that pollutant that's stuck down here at the surface because it can't mix out. And that can have an impact on you, on your lungs, and especially for sensitive groups. If you have some sort of lung disease or something like COPD, you really notice when there's ozone issues, especially with ground level ozone. That is the bad ozone, and that's what we monitor throughout the summer to try and give people warning on, hey, today's air quality is not going to be the greatest. So good ozone, bad ozone. Let's take a look at, and we'll kind of review the layers of the atmosphere. We showed you this graphic. We won't go through all of them again, but the troposphere, again, the bottommost layer, that's where all the weather exists. That's what you and I know as sensible weather. And just to put it into perspective for you, Mount Everest reaches near the top of the troposphere, and usually this is, the planes will fly right at the top of the troposphere or at the bottom of the stratosphere, and that extends about 7 miles up from the surface on average. Now, sometimes it shifts a little bit, that tropopause, which is the separation, that kind of demarcation line between the stratosphere and the troposphere. So when we talk about ground level ozone, we're talking about the troposphere and those pollutants that get stuck here at the surface, which could cause problems, again, for sensitive groups if they have health issues. Now, the good ozone, as we go up the scale here again, stratosphere, that's where we find most of our ozone production. Ozone particles in the stratosphere sink due to warming with height, okay? You don't have any water vapor present in the stratosphere, and the top of the stratosphere is about 31 miles up from the surface. So stratosphere is where you find the good ozone. That's where most of the ozone production occurs, and that is the ozone layer that protects us from the harmful UV rays of the sun. Important when it comes to air quality. You need that good ozone in the stratosphere, but down here at the troposphere, not good when we have low-level ground level ozone. All right, so let's move on here and we'll talk about some common pollutants that you find. Hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, sulfur oxides, carbon dioxide all lead to ozone. And you know, when you breathe all this stuff in, again, if you're unhealthy, some groups, we call them sensitive groups, will really notice when the air quality is poor because of these common pollutants, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, sulfur oxides, nitrogen oxides, so on and so forth. So that's just kind of a look at some of the common pollutants that we monitor. Well, not we personally, but the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation and the Global Burden of Disease Network monitor. So how do these pollutants happen? Well, there's several different sources that cause these pollutants. One of the big ones is electric power generators, those big power plants. You may have seen pictures of the big smokestacks and all the pollutants coming out of those, heading up into the atmosphere. Heavy equipment, bulldozers, stuff like that, emitting the exhaust. Manufacturing, refineries are a common source of pollutant. And vehicles, just driving your car. You know, and a lot of vehicles now, they've done a lot of really good work in lowering the emissions from the vehicles that we see on the roadway every day. You know, a lot of them, when you pull up to the stoplight, they will shut off, so you're not sitting there idling, adding to the pollution of the atmosphere. But those are a look at some of the sources that cause these pollutants, like we were just talking about. All of these, I'll go back a slide here. Hydrocarbons, sulfur oxides, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, nitrogen, all produces that ozone, and they all come from those sources there. Electric power generators, heavy equipment, manufacturing, refineries, and vehicles. Now, you might have heard about acid rain. It is a real thing, and it can happen, and all of these and everything that we've discussed so far can contribute to acid rain. Literally, that's what it is. It's acid falling from the sky because of these pollutants, and that can have implications on things like your car and vegetation and stuff like that, because you have this acid rain that falls from the sky. So how does that happen? Let's kind of explore that a little bit. What we have here is a little diagram. It's called the acid rain pathway, and you can find this right on the EPA website, Environmental Protection Agency. And this is kind of a little graphic that explains how acid rain forms. So we'll give you a minute to catch your bearings as you look at that graphic there. So if you see number 1, which is down there by the smokestack and all the pollutants, the nitrogen oxides and stuff going up into the sky. You can also see the tractor trailers and the vehicles pulling into the power plant there. Those are all emitting pollutants into the atmosphere. And then what happens is it goes up into the sky, and the sun, all those pollutants undergo a chemical reaction with the sun, which makes them acidic. And depending on temperature, it can fall even as snow, acid snow in some of the higher elevations. Acid rain kind of occurs there as well. You can see as you look to the right side of the diagram. And what that does is it all falls back to the surface, and it has implications for not only soil or ground, but some of the vegetation. You can see kind of the bare trees over there. And then that filters back into the groundwater where it can affect aquatic life, fish, and so on and so forth. So acid rain, bad, okay? And it's something that we keep an eye on. Doesn't happen all that often, but it can happen. And when it does, it usually costs a pretty penny because, like I said, you have literally acid falling from the sky because of all the pollutants that are in the atmosphere. So that's kind of a look at kind of the acid rain pathway. Again, if you want to learn more about that, you can just hop right over to the Environmental Protection Agency website, the EPA, and learn more about acid rain. So we kind of talked about the pollutants that are in the atmosphere from vehicles and refineries and electric power generators. But did you know that it's also kind of a naturally occurring process? There's something called natural pollution, and it's something that the Earth undergoes. So even if we weren't here, okay, and there were no vehicles and there were no manufacturing plants and there were no refineries, there would still be pollution from the Earth. And here's how that works. So when we look at natural pollution, forest fires are a big one, okay? With all the smoke and the junk from those forest fires getting lifted up into the atmosphere. Soil erosion is considered a natural pollution. Volcanoes are also a biggie. Think about that. Volcanoes, when you get an eruption from a volcano, it's spewing rock and all kinds of junk way up high into the atmosphere. And it can actually, when a volcanic eruption occurs, it can actually impact the temperature on a global scale. Now, that might not seem like much to you, but when you're talking about a globe and the temperature changing by a half a degree or a degree just from one volcanic eruption, that's a huge deal. And volcanoes, we have them, and they are active volcanoes, and Hawaii is a good example. Also into Washington State, there are volcanoes that are active there. So every time there's a volcanic eruption, all of that dust and rock gets thrown up into the atmosphere, and that can have implications, like I said, on global temperatures. I have an example of that. Well, I thought I did. I guess I don't. Of a volcanic eruption, just kind of, I thought I had that picture in there. But you can see that big ash cloud going up into the atmosphere, and that's throwing all those pollutants up into the atmosphere. So that is a form of natural pollution. So how do we monitor all of this? Well, there's a chart that we use, and it's called the Air Quality Index, and we occasionally will show you this, especially if there's really poor air quality. And this is basically a measure of the different levels of air quality. So you can see behind me there, green, yellow, orange, red. When we get into the purple, I know that graphic is hard to see, but basically green is good. So if we come on the air and say we're in the green today for air quality, we don't have to worry about it. Yellow, moderate. And then as you go up the scale, it worsens. And like I said, you remember that stat I showed you at the beginning, 4.9 million people. And some of the bigger cities really have to deal with air quality issues. This also available on the EPA website. So if you're curious about the different levels of air quality and the color coordinates that go with them, you can check them out there on the EPA website. You know, orange, unhealthy for sensitive groups. Red is very unhealthy. Well, I should just say it's unhealthy. Then you get into the purple, and that's very unhealthy for everyone. So it's rare that we get that here in Northwest PA. Now, come back to me on camera real quick, and we were talking about this being prevalent in the summer, but it's actually pretty prevalent in the winter too, because sometimes in the winter we get what's called a temperature inversion. So as you go up in height in the atmosphere, it actually can be warmer in the winter, and that warm air is like a lid. So the cold air, because it's heavier, has to settle down at the surface. Well, what do you do in the winter to keep your house warm? Well, you burn your fireplace, right? So you're putting smoke into the atmosphere, okay? But it can only go so high if there's a temperature inversion. So a lot of that pollutant in the winter just kind of settles right down at the surface because it runs into that temperature inversion. So in the winter, air quality can even be an issue too. And that might be a little bit weird to think about because in the winter you're thinking about fresh, cold air. It can't be polluted, but in some cases, air quality can actually be worse in the wintertime because of those temperatures and temperature inversions that we get as you go up in the atmosphere and all those pollutants that settle right at the surface from wood stoves and stuff like that. Now, I told you there was some good news with all of this, right? I didn't want to be a total downer. Check this graphic out, and this is, I think, where we'll leave it today. But we won't go into all of this, but basically what the takeaway here is, notice how the lines are slanting down to the right. This is air quality from 1990 up until recently. And notice there is a marked decrease. So we're doing a good job, okay? You don't get as many instances of acid rain and the like as we did way back in the 80s and early 90s. So we've slowly seen a decline in the pollution that we emit. Now, we still have some work to do, but I really just kind of wanted to show you that graphic. I know it's kind of a topic that you don't really think about when you're thinking about summer and you're not really worried about air quality, but on the whole, not bad compared to where it was back around 1990. We've seen a steady decline. So air quality, an issue for sure, something that we keep an eye on, something you might not think about very often in the summer, but like I said, if you're a sufferer of some sort of lung complication or breathing or respiratory issue, air quality can be a big deal. And it's something that we do monitor, and we go over those different levels that I showed you there. And again, if you want any more information about this, EPA is a great resource. You can learn all about air quality and pollution and what you can do to reduce that pollution into the atmosphere. But the good news is it's been working. The steps that we have taken to reduce the pollution in the atmosphere. So as you're out there having your fun this summer, you might not be thinking about air quality, but it can be an issue. Not so much all of the time here in Northwest PA, but that's something that we do keep an eye on. So if you see higher numbers on an AQI, an air quality index, that's when you need to pay attention. That's the Weather Academy for today. We've got a couple more topics to discuss before we wrap it up here again. Last week of 3 days a week. Then we're going to reduce it to one, but we're also going to take some time off here. So I hope this was a little bit enlightening for you when it comes to air quality. And we will see you back here Wednesday and Friday. But a quick note on Wednesday, because the state updates the COVID-19 situation, timing might be shift, or we might not be able to do it at all, but we will definitely be back Friday as we wrap up Weather Academy. Hey, great day today. A lot of sun. Get out there and enjoy fresh air. No air quality issues today. Enjoy, and we'll see you next time.